Welcome to the Joanne Avison podcast. Delighted to have you with me today. So join me as I dive into the world of fascia and see if I can unlock some of the connections to spiritual awakening. Fascia is often overlooked. In fact, it's dismissed sometimes. And that's given the history of how anatomy is studied, something we'll look into in later episodes. But if you study embryology and you look at the way we organize ourselves as embryos, we discover that the fascial matrix, the fabric of our form, plays a really crucial, pivotal role in our physical development, but also in our spiritual connection. Think about it. We are animated by a soul, a spirit that activates our tissues, in fact, hallmarks them as being alive. And that begins at the very moment that we are conceived. Let's call it a spark of life. And that's how we begin. And at the end of life, after transition, the body ceases to be animated. It changes dramatically. Motion stops and the whole body enters a continuing process of contraction. Technically, it's called rigor contraction. Now, when you see a body posthumously or after the person has passed away, you could say that spirit is present as missing. It's the remains of the deceased. It resembles their life, but it looks very, very different. There is no spirit. Spirit leaves. And what we could consider is that all through our lives, spirit actually animates us, or better put, it animates us by moving through us in our wholeness, the unified nature of us expressing ourselves as beings, as a soul, animating a form. Now, many people feel a disconnection between their physical bodies and what we might call their spiritual awareness. Sometimes intellectually, we have different definitions of what those things mean. And what that can do is make the journey into spirituality much more challenging, because it's not actually an intellectual process any more than movement is. So what we're kind of talking about is more of an instinctive process where moving in present time, which involves the fascia of our entire system, is animated by the spirit that is the breathing, living nature of us being alive. And once we begin to understand that, perhaps our spiritual journey doesn't have to be quite so challenging. And sometimes people mistake emotional feelings or intellectual understanding for the way that spirit actually works. In other words, we can go off down a rabbit hole thinking something should be this way, this way, this way. And then when it doesn't happen the way we thought it should, we get upset and we get feelings of concern or out of controlness or disorganization. And that's not really how spirit works. And that can form a kind of a disconnect between a sense of spiritual awakening or spiritual development and physical process. And this disconnection can lead to feelings of being ungrounded or disconnected from our inner selves. And I personally think, and this is after 30 years of practice of working with people in movement and manual therapy, that our physical bodies and our spiritual awareness are deeply intertwined. The ability to put it in words is a whole other thing, because it lives through poetry. It lives through beautiful art where there might not be any words. And sometimes it just lives through a sense of beingness where there's nothing to say or even silence. Not necessarily. But it's kind of all of those things. And not only is it intimately intertwined with our form, but it's also present in the finest detail throughout our form. And when we're not connected to our bodies, it's kind of hard or harder to tap into our spiritual side. And I often come across people saying to me, well, I've got to connect with my spiritual self through my meditation or other practices, which of course is possible. But if they're out of tune with their physical bodies, it can be really tough to make progress and accumulate an overall sense of spirituality, because you think your body's got to be in a certain position, or you're just not in touch with the subtlety of moment-to-moment awareness that's available to all of us all the time. And we don't have to have a certain way of moving in order to be spiritually aware. And sometimes people get very caught up in a spiritual journey that's really a case of looking for big, huge things and big, huge changes. Sitting in meditation for hours a day, or walking in silence in the dark. I've heard all sorts of weird and wonderful things, very deep breathing practices. And in yoga, for example, there are some yogis who say we have to be so careful of not overusing meditation to actually dissociate and just not be aware of our everyday lives. And what if the divinity lies in the detail, the micro movements of every pulsing living cell within us? Because each living cell has a nucleus, has a central, to me, holy trinity of the electrons and the protons and the neutrons. So it's not just about the negative and the positive charge. It's about the negative and the positive and the neutral balance between all three. And that's the basis of the structural geometry behind how the fascia self-organizes, which is another whole story for another whole day. But it's animated by the pulsation of round things, cells, in kind of tubes, pockets, and pouches of membranes, connective tissue, and all the in-between, the so-called interstitium or the extracellular matrix, all of which has different ways of being described as expressions of the fascia, if you consider that to be the matrix of all of us. And when it's alive and well, it's hydrated, it's bound water, it's a liquid crystal matrix. And it's also a pre-stiffened architecture, a pre-tensioned architecture. Now, I don't mean the kind of tension that means we're under tension and we're upset and we've got our teeth gritted and we're all wound up. I mean the natural tension of the way we're formed, that we don't deflate. You know, when we're healthy and we're breathing really well, our lungs stay open all the time, and we inhale and we exhale and we keep breathing. We don't flatten when we lie down in our beds or sit down in an armchair. We don't crumple into the shape of the chair. We stay open, and that's called a pre-stiffened architecture. And that is based on round things, which is why historically, when anatomy was studied on a linear basis, we have such a struggle making sense of how the fluid matrix of the fascia actually animates and is animated by our tissues. So for me, because living, breathing, moving are the definitions of being alive, there's this respiration, this re-spiriting in the micro-movement pulsing of every living cell within us. And the whole organism has a field, an energy field. Some people call it the aura. Some people call it the plasmic field. Some people have specific definitions of each kind of sheath of our existence. And in deeper spiritual work, in a mystery school, those are considered more and more subtle bodies that we occupy all the time. And to get in touch with those, I think one of the most beautiful things that I've experienced awakening to in my spiritual practice is that every single living cell, even the organelles within the cell, the cells within each organ, and the organs within us as a whole organism, and the in-between, is all kind of alive and communicating, intercellular communication, intracellular communication. It's all got very posh words in medical terms. And people argue about whether it's fascia or extracellular matrix or intracellular matrix or inner cellular matrix. It is all part of what we could call the fascia matrix. And all of these tissues and the fluids within and around them have roles to play, multiple roles to play. And if it's living, it's animated by our spirit, all of it at once, as one whole being. So when there's a disconnection between body and spirit, or we try and separate mind and emotions or feelings and try and put them all in separate boxes when they're so profoundly interlinked, it can really affect our emotional well-being. And that can make it hard to manage stress and anxiety because we're trying to change something. We're trying to say the way this isn't right for me. Whereas one of the keys to spiritual awakening is the awareness of being. It's just being. It's being present. And the fascia matrix is considered the tissue of temporality, timing, time, the rhythm of us, the rhyme that calls to us. And for me, if we can acknowledge and address the disconnect that we might feel, we actually take the first step towards spiritual growth and spiritual healing. We don't have to make ourselves wrong. We don't have to make ourselves right. We can just accept the awkwardness. I call it the goofiness. When I stumble across myself doing something so daft that I knew better, and somebody says to me, "Jo, did you just do that?" And I go, "Yeah." Suddenly, it's like a giggle comes in. It like comes in, I think the word's unbidden. I think you can say that. It comes in without me calling it in. It just comes in. And Paul Thornley and I, we worked together on Myofascial Magic in Action, as some of you know. And if you haven't listened to some of those podcasts, they're brilliant. So do tune in. But we just recently released a complete blooper. I mean, I couldn't say, I don't think I can say it now. Adhesive capsulitis in the shoulder. Couldn't get the words out. Absolute muddle. And I just had a moment of being kind of stressed because I couldn't work out what I was supposed to say. And then I thought, oh, can I just accept? Oh, that's it. Accept. Doesn't mean agree. Doesn't mean it's acceptable. Just accept. Goof. Blooper. Mistake. Error. And I wonder if just accepting how we are at the point in time that we are doing the accepting, it somehow addresses the disconnection. And we start to kind of feel more at ease in our own skin. And why do I think the fascia matrix is so important in this connection? Well, we have historically inherited a narrative that separates the fascia from the forms it surrounds. Well, wherever you go, you'll hear that fascia is a connective tissue that wraps organs and acts as a sort of packaging between things and a supporting structure around things. Whereas when you actually study it in the anatomy lab, you realize it's ubiquitous, meaning it's absolutely everywhere in the body, that it manages to span all different scales from micro. I mean, microscope isn't the word for it. We've seen it through endoscopes and all kinds of things. And beyond that, at the gross level, you see it when it's dried out. It's a little bit like fiberglass, but in the living body, it's not. It's much more fluid and hydrated. And so historically, we've inherited this narrative that separates this original fabric of our form from the parts that it forms and that form within it. Remember, embryologically, you are the architect that self-organized the architecture in order to express yourself as the architect. Now, that should be going around your head as a kind of a, what did she say? I say it often. It's a key to me in understanding all this because it's beyond reason. It's beyond our thinking mind. It's a sensory awareness. We kind of know it's true. We self-organize. Nobody else was there. Nobody bolted our limbs on before we were born. We self-organized to express ourselves, as a whole. And the form we did that in, the fluid matrix in which we did that, is the fascia. And it's considered by many to just be a network of connective tissues that surrounds our muscles, our bones, our organs. But in truth, every single one of them and the sensory pathways that interrelate them are made of fascia. And it plays a crucial role in our physical health, but it also has a profound impact on our energy field and the flow of emotional release, or the frequency at which we think or work or feel or move or rest or breathe or eat or sit or stand, and the time we spend doing each activity. It's literally clocking all this information, all these highways, a bit like AI works, but it's already in us. I call it BI, bioemotional intelligence. It's doing that all the time. We just don't know it because it's not an intellectual process. It happens much faster. It happens at the speed of light. It happens at the speed of sound. And it happens at the speed at which we live, a different speed at which we move, a different speed at which we talk about it and describe it. Because language and intellectualization takes us much longer to do. Think about it. If you wanted somebody to move and you said, please, could you get up and move? No, put your right foot forward. No, your left foot. No, that's not your left, that's your right. You can't describe their movement to them the same way as they can just get up and do it. It happens much, much faster. And fascia is also an exquisitely sensitive tissue. It kind of clocks our every move. The body keeps the score. And it shapes our gesture, and our gestures and moves shape us and our fascia accordingly. It's always whole. It's always reciprocal. It's always both and, either or for. So when our fascia gets restricted, when it gets sticky or it gets scarred, insulted or injured, or if we just don't move in ways that allow it time to adapt to, it can block the flow of energy in our bodies and lead to feelings of stagnation, or we might call it emotional pain or concern. And that can be a precursor to injury because, say, for example, you're very, very jet lagged and you don't realize, and you haven't made up your sleep. Your body knows. Your body knows. Your being is aware. Your spirit is aware of that. But you might not have recognized that. And you go back to do what you would normally do, but you haven't slept that night because you've been on the red eye overnight, and you go over on your ankle and you're like, oh my God, why did I do that? That was so stupid of me. I know how to move in these movements. But what actually happened was your subtle awareness, super tired, didn't give you a warning signal early enough. Your fascial matrix couldn't animate and adapt at the speed that it normally would. So that can cause injuries. And then you're cross with yourself. So you have a bit of emotional pain, or you work out what you should have, could have, would have done. But then something happens when somebody says, you haven't done anything wrong. You were just jet lagged. And your body was a bit too tired and it couldn't respond. It couldn't reflexively react in good time. And you go, oh, huh. And then something in you knows that you knew. I come across this all the time with my clients. If we can identify and distinguish what happened in a way that makes sense to their form and makes sense of their experience. I cannot tell you. It's like having a healing art medicine that you can just sprinkle over everything. It's just amazing because the spirit responds and the tissue can adapt because it kind of has faith in itself and it trusts itself. And for me, it's a very, very intelligent and aware architecture. Now, in truth, the science of fascia is still emerging, still struggling with ancient reductionist principles that really don't always make sense of what movement teachers and hands-on therapists feel and see and experience with their clients. But what is clear, and this is clear, is that this tissue is closely linked to our emotional and spiritual well-being. Whatever names you give it, the proprioceptive, interoceptive, extraceptive, interface, somatic, healing, ground substance, all these words, it is a whole body walking around as a being. Now, some people think, for example, that by releasing tension in our fascia, we unlock emotional blockages and promote spiritual growth. But actually, as I said before, it's a pre-tensioned architecture. It's always open. We don't lie down on the bed and our chest collapses like a flat wetsuit that just goes bleh. It doesn't work like that. Like when we take off our clothes, they're no longer held up, but we stay held up, we stay held open. That's called pre-tensioned. It needs tension and compression to hold it open and give it volume. And it's the quality of the tensional network that actually matters. We don't want to deflate. We want to keep the natural spring in our step. And that, all by itself, brings joy. I don't know if you've ever tried skipping. It's very difficult to be grumpy if you're skipping. And I've said in previous podcasts about changing a frown into a smile and seeing what happens. I always remember Tom Myers saying, can you, instead of changing your mind about your body, can you change your body about your mind? And the answer to that is yes, because I've seen people get off my bodywork table time and time and time again and go, oh my goodness, and they just grin. Usually they don't say much. Usually their feeling or their awareness or their spiritual meaning recalibration, kind of has to come into recalibrating where they are. And there's this smile, their face light up. It's amazing. It can be so delightful to just simply feel vitality. And perhaps that is spirit expressing through us. Just like when a bird sings because it feels safe and happy. But this is a sense of delight, of joy. It kind of comes on us. It's like when I couldn't work out how to speak in that latest outtake, it was like spirit just came in and made it okay, made it funny, made it silly, and we can just let go and accept that. And last but not least, I want to say that fascia is so closely tied to our nervous system. It forms the neurofascial vessels as such, and the interfaces between them. It means that it can affect our emotional state and our ability to connect with our so-called spiritual selves, or our imagination, or our access to joy. Because again, it's not an intellectual process. You can't sit down and say, oh right, I want to feel joy now, and smile, a fake smile. It's almost an awareness of a possibility and inviting it in. And that for me is inviting spirit in. And we'll do a little technique at the end. So stay tuned. We'll finish up with something that you might get a sense of that. Because there's a lot of research out there that shows fascia can store emotional trauma and hold in areas of the body that are stuck, hold real sort of ancient resonance patterns or blockages in the tissue. And they can be released through all sorts of practices like yoga or massage, breathing techniques, taking a lovely walk, having a rest. And many people, and I talk to a lot of practitioners, and they may not use these exact words, but they are describing a very similar phenomenon, that they've worked with people very subtly over the tissue matrix with the fascia and they've reported profound transformations that they can't explain. And for me, it doesn't have to be great, big, huge and weird to be a spiritual transformation. But what it is a kind of an increased feeling of connection, a sense of belonging to the universe, to themselves, to a sort of enhanced feeling of their intuition and their access to their creativity, if they give themselves time to tune into this tissue that lives through the whole time of our lives as us. So for me, understanding and working with fascia can be a really, really powerful tool for enhancing our spiritual practices and animating and augmenting our sense of well-being. And it works both ways. If we enhance our spiritual practice and well-being, we kind of can accumulate a state of self-regulation. In other words, it builds with practice. And when you can do that, when you can self-regulate, it resonates with others through something called co-regulation. And that's something like what we feel when we pause to listen to that bird song I spoke of earlier, or to stop and smell a rose, or just stand in the sun with your eyes closed for a moment and see the light dance behind your eyes. It's literally a moment of time out, and what my dear friend Shane McDermott calls resonant time. And you can listen all about that in our series on space and time. And it can really deeply shift our perspective. It simply helps us to relax and enjoy the moment more. And we're releasing or relaxing or feeling relief through playing the pauses. It's laughing with a friend or stopping to enjoy something. Our fascial matrix can change, and it can shift the energy flow of how life force eases as it runs through us. And we can deepen our spiritual connection and begin to really cultivate a sense of inner peace. It's what my spiritual teacher calls a portable paradise. It's in us all the time. We just put so much stuff in its way. Imagine it's just there for the knowing. Well, in my world, why the fascia makes such a difference is that it can be like an instantaneous signal throughout the body. The fascia can transmit this immediately because it's a body-wide matrix. It's throughout. And it expresses time in multifaceted ways. So it can respond from its history, like remembering something. It can respond instantly, like in the now, as we take a breath, which we're going to do together in a minute. Or, and you'll understand this, it can even give you a sense of something coming in advance. Have you ever just had a sense that something's going to really work out well, or something's slightly out and you've got to take a different approach, and it just guides you to stop and pause and assess for a moment? It's sometimes referred to as our sixth sense, which technically is our proprioception, but actually it's our primary sense in my world, because it's that feeling our way into form that the embryo originally did. And without question, it is a part of the subtle interface between body and spirit. The spirit, the inspiration of moving, of being inspired to move the way that we do at any given time. It's through the body. And awakening to what already is feels more than spiritual. It can actually quietly bring us to a sense of inner confidence, kind of deep acceptance of who we are and how we are at any given moment in time. So join me now. Let's just take a pause together. Take a lovely breath in and just whisper inside. It's okay to be me just this way, right now, today. And gently let that breath go, just for a little longer than it took to breathe in. And then this time, receive the breath as if it's a gift from Spirit. Just receive the breath in grace and say, thank you for this breath. Just because. And savor that inhale right to the top. And then ever so gently give it away, as if you're giving it to the trees that breathe us breathing. And one more time. Enjoy that respiration as if it's respiriting. Inhale. Respirit, all of you at once, just because you say so. All the way up. And then exhale for a little bit longer, as if you're listening to the exhalation, your own breath. God bless you. And let me know in the comments what you think about the connection between fascia and spirituality. And don't forget to check out the other episodes on space and time in the body and being present to our tissues and their signals, because it's such a key part of spiritual growth. Enjoy. Have a great time. Press subscribe so that you are informed immediately of any episodes coming up. Take care.